IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth. The Beatles are back in the news, not that they ever were out of it, but now with the release of the 6-part series on their life and work, The Beatles Get Back by Peter Jackson, with so far unseen footage, has put them back in the limelight. What is the secret of their longevity? That their music sounds fresh to every new generation of music lovers. Our guest today, Oliver Craske, author and freelance editor, has been associated with several projects about the Beatles. He was one of a team of 4 editors of the huge official Beatles Anthology in 2000, and he was project editor of the new Get Back book, which has come out along with the movie. His book, Indian Sun, The Life of Music of Ravi Shankar, was published in 2020 to rave reviews. It's been extremely well received everywhere. Among the many books he has edited was Olivia Harrison's book on her husband George, which is yet another Beatles connection to Craske. Among the books he has edited was Olivia Harrison's book on her husband George, which is yet another Beatles connection to Craske. May I also remind listeners that we are doing this interview on December the 8th, which is the 41st anniversary of the assassination of John Lennon. Very poignant occasion, therefore, for all of us. But let's go straight into the podcast. Welcome to the Wire Talks, Oliver Craske.
Thank you, Sidharth. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Oliver, you worked on the Beatles Anthology. Perhaps you can tell us what makes the Fab Four so durable.
Well, it's a good question. I think, in a way, there's a very simple answer, which is that the music is just wonderful and timeless. I think that they are very much the best of that whole generation of bands, and that's the simple answer to it. There are many other complicated answers, probably. I think in respect of the new film, which you mentioned, the Get Back film, I think that what we get there, the insight we get there, is we actually see them at work on these amazing songs, and we see them as personalities. And, you know, you mentioned the death of, the tragic death of John Lennon, and of course, George is no longer with us. But to be able to watch them at work, it's like they're alive again. It's like we're in the room with them in this film. It's amazing.
Oliver, you had worked on the Beatles Anthology. Perhaps you can tell us what makes the Fab Four so durable.
Well, it's a good question. And I think the simple answer is just their sheer quality. I mean, I think they really stand out in that whole generation of rock and roll bands in the 60s. They were always my personal favorite. And I think we use this word genius maybe too lightly, but there's a lot of genius going on here. And to see them in the Get Back film now, we get, I think, an insight into them as musicians creating these songs that we know so well, and as personalities. And given what you just referred to, John Lennon's, it being the anniversary of his death today, and the fact that George is no longer with us either, it's so poignant and wonderful to see them in the studio alive. It's like we're there with them, and, you know, we're sharing their jokes, their anxieties, their tensions, their creativity. It's, I think that film gives us new insights.
And, you know, they banter a lot while during the creative process. That's a wonderful thing to see. Even towards the end, you know, they're supposed to have been getting angry with each other, bitter about so many things. But they keep joking and cracking wisecracks with each other. And Lennon at his sarcastic and witty best, and the others. It's just amazing to be watching that all these years later. And suddenly the songs start making some sense.
They do. I mean, it's incredible to see songs like Get Back being created in front of you, or George working on his song Something. You know, he says, I've been working at this for 6 months and I can't get the lyric right. And, you know, she attracts me like something. What is it she's going to attract me like? And, you know, you just see these, you know, it's the creativity in process. It's fantastic.
Your own association with the Beatles goes back a long time. Were you always a fan? And have these projects given you a new appreciation of what they are and what they created?
Yeah, I was always a fan. I think from a very young age, I mean, under the age of 10, I think weirdly enough, they were, apart from maybe, one or two pop bands who were around the 70s like ABBA, they were probably the first band I really became conscious of, even though I was actually not born until 1970. But they were my parents' generation. And I always felt like they were my band, in my teenage years. And of course, I've discovered so much other music as well, but I've always come back to them. And yeah, I think working on the books about them, and then most recently on this Get Back film, it keeps refreshing my interest and love for them. And yeah, I think you do get new insights. I think, for example, in this Get Back film, there are these tensions that you referred to. I mean, we've always known that these sessions had some tensions around them, but I think it's amazing to see, especially John and Paul, as you said, bantering so much, and and they're getting on so well. Really, I mean, not perfect, but imagine being cooped up with each other for so many days and months and years together. I mean, a lot of us have struggled with a bit of lockdown in the last year or so. They were locked down together for a decade. I mean, it's amazing that they're still getting on so well.
You worked on the anthology, which came out in 2000, a worldwide bestseller. What did it entail? What's the anthology all about? And how did four of you, work on it?
Well, the Beatles Anthology was actually a series of projects that came out in the 1990s when the surviving Beatles, at that time George was still alive, through their company, which is called Apple, or Apple Core, in fact, not to be confused with the computer giant. They decided, that they were going to go back over what they had in their archives, and they released these anthology albums, and they made a TV series looking back on the whole experience of being Beatles, for which they did new interviews. And then the third aspect of that was the book, the Beatles Anthology, which grew out of the interviews they'd done for the TV series. And also they gave some additional interviews, especially for the book. And so it became this enormous tome of their own first-hand accounts. So it's all kind of oral history. It's all them speaking in their own words and voices about what had happened. And so the three surviving Beatles were all involved, plus Yoko Ono on behalf of John Lennon. And I was just very lucky to get involved in this book, because I was working at a publisher called Genesis. This was my first job in publishing. My boss he knew all four parties. He was particularly close to George Harrison, but he knew all four parties. And then he got into this position of creating a book for them. And so I was the lucky person to get involved with that. As I said, there was a team of four of us on it. And so, yeah, we pulled together all the illustrations and spliced together all these transcripts from interviews, and then they each, checked it over in a sort of editorial process, and that came out eventually in the year 2000. And as you said, it was, it was a number one bestseller here. I'm speaking from the UK, and all around the world, it sold huge numbers.
Did it? Is it still around? Is it available?
Yeah, it's still in print. It's a large format illustrated book. And it's become a really, really important source for people writing about the Beatles. It's actually quite interesting to go back to that now to see what they had to say about the Get Back sessions, at that time. Yeah, so that was a bit of a dream job for me to be able to work on that at that time. I was going to say I'd already worked with Ravi Shankar as well just before that, through the same job.
20 years later, virtually, or 2 decades later, you work on this one, and Get Back book. Is the Get Back book a kind of tie-in?
Yeah, it's tied into the documentary that's just come out, as you mentioned, directed by Peter Jackson. And like the anthology book, it's actually, I was working directly for Apple, the Beatles company, on this. There was a team of us working on it. The book actually is inspired by a book that was issued with the original album. So the history of the Get Back project is pretty complicated, as you might know. But they did these sessions in January 1969 with a view to making a TV special, a concert. There was going to be a TV special and a concert at the end of it that would be televised. And that in the end didn't happen. They decided not to do that, but they had filmed all this wonderful footage. And a movie came out the following year, which was called Let It Be. And that came out just after the band split. At the same time, the album came out, the Let It Be, which was accompanying that film. And with some of the early copies of that album, there was an accompanying book that came out. It was like a kind of deluxe package already in 1970. And the book consisted of some transcripts from the film and some photographs. And so that's kind of the inspiration for this book that accompanies the new documentary, which has much longer transcripts and many more photographs. But that's the idea. It's a tie-in, yeah.
And so that's going to be available worldwide.
Yeah, it's just come out, and I gather it's doing very well. And the film's been so amazingly received and covered. It's all been very positive about that.
Obviously, fans in this country who may be listening to this will be waiting for most important question to be answered. Is the India link explored in the documentary, in the series?
In the new one? Not particularly, because this is a time when very much focusing on those new, they're creating new songs, actually, for this, what was going to be this TV concert. So it's not not really a phase. It's interesting that this is a year after they had been at Rishikesh. So they are slightly in a new phase. I mean, the influence is still there, above all on George Harrison. I think that's the really, he had this lifelong connection to India once he'd got the bug. And that's very much tied up with his connection with Ravi Shankar. But he, as people may know, he had started learning sitar. He'd taken quite a lot of lessons from Ravi Shankar, but that really stopped he was kind of really into it for 3 years. And then in 1968, he pulled back. He kind of realized, I'm never going to be a great sitarist. I've started too late. There are so many people who are so much better than me. And he kind of goes back to writing rock and roll songs. But he really credited his studies of Indian classical music with causing his own songwriting to blossom. And, he said how, what he called the strange melodies and, that he got from Indian music and also rhythm. He said it was a fantastic training in rhythm. And so you find that these songs that he's writing at the time, 1968, 1969, often do have these quite subtle influences at times. If you think about Here Comes the Sun, which is slightly after this period, to highlight elements in it where he will play something 3 times, and end on the beat. So he really, he was really conscious of that it had taken his songwriting to a new level. So that, I think, is important. And he's very in a very creative phase at the time of these Get Back sessions, but not so explicitly Indian.
But even though this is from 70 onwards or 69 onwards, the film series, the White Album, which came just before that, had a lot of work done in India, right?
Yes, I mean, a lot of those songs were written in Rishikesh. That was incredibly productive time for them, I think, because George and John were there for nearly 2 months, and they were churning out the songs. They were so prolific, these musicians. I mean, and then they filled up the double album, the White Album, and they still had songs left over, and they were still writing new ones. So, I think it's still very much, it's in the background of everything that they were writing at that time. And it was a really prolific time. I think people might think that they sort of fizzled out, in Acrimony or whatever in 1969 as a band, but not at all. They were an incredibly, it was like a sort of glorious final wave, really. And during these sessions in what's called the Get Back sessions, they actually were writing quite a lot of the songs that end up on Abbey Road, which was an album they recorded later in 1969. And was actually the last thing they did actually record as an album. So that's where you find songs like Here Comes the Sun and Something as well. So, yeah, I think it's still infusing everything. And with George, it never went away, especially.
And, of course, they had the final rooftop concert, which I'm sure shows up somewhere, because it's Get Back after all. So that's their final goodbye, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's fabulous. I mean, you know, people should watch it. You see the entire concert uncut in this documentary, and they're playing on the roof of their office. You know, and you know, this is sort of slightly surreal scenario. But it's the last concert they ever played. They hadn't actually played one for a couple of years before that because they got so fed up with the impossibility of Beatlemania. And so famously, they, you know, at the time of Sgt. Pepper, they'd gone into the studio and really explored that side of music. They became a studio band. And then, you know, they were feeling that they wanted to get back, as the song says, to playing live. Particularly, you know, different members of the band were sort of more enthusiastic than others. Paul especially wanted to play live. But the great thing, you watch them in that concert on the roof, and you see what a wonderful band they were. I mean, they're playing all this live, and you can see them, you know, bouncing off each other and really enjoying it. I mean, it's a wonderful sequence. It's about 40 minutes they play, and meanwhile, down in the street below, you've got the sort of the public, you know, central London on their lunch hours. You know, they've all come up. The office workers have come out. What's this music going on? You know, they can't actually see it because it's up on the roof and they're down at street level. And the whole thing was filmed. You know, really, really well filmed. I mean, amazingly well filmed when you consider this is 1969. Multi-camera filming, and they even had cameras down in the street interviewing people about what they thought was going on up the top. What did they think about music? It's a wonderful.
Policemen getting annoyed.
Yes, because they were making a lot of noise, you know, and you know, police were getting complaints from some of the local people who plainly weren't Beatles fans, and they were knocking on the door and asking what was that noise going on, and you know, asking for it to be turned off. So there's this really rather funny kind of extended, you know, encounter with these police who are sort of very politely but firmly trying to get the noise turned down, while everyone in the building is trying to allow it to go on. It's great, but it was also kind of, they actually anticipated that. There's a very funny bit earlier in the documentary where Paul says that, you know, wouldn't it be great if at the end of the documentary, you know, the police came on and pulled us off our instruments and arrested us, you know, and he's sort of joking, but you know, not entirely. So eventually, yes, they did. You know, they had to kind of turn it off after about 40 minutes, and you know, the police went away quietly. But they had their footage. You know, it's brilliant.
You just mentioned that George Harrison learned the sitar, but kind of, you know, left it after 3 years or so. But he kept up a lifelong friendship with Ravi Shankar. You edited a book on Harrison. You were the editor of Shankar's autobiography and wrote a full book on the sitar player. And you learned classical music. What are the connections between the band, or specifically George Harrison and Ravi Shankar?
Ravi Shankar was, I mean, to George Harrison, he was a great inspiration. I mean, this was a life-changing point in it, you know, for him in 1965 when he discovered Indian music and also Indian spirituality. I mean, he was famously a real devotee. It was, you know, it blew his mind, really. You know, he talked about this in spiritual terms, but also musically. He was just absolutely amazed by Indian classical music, and the vehicle for that was Ravi Shankar. And the reason for that was that Ravi Shankar was already pretty successful in internationally. He'd been touring since 1956 in Britain, in Europe, in America, around the world, and he'd established himself as a successful artist. The meeting between George Harrison and Ravi Shankar was, I mean, it was kind of revolutionary for both of them. But certainly from George's point of view, it really opened his mind and his ears. He fell in love with Indian music. And you start seeing Indian music appearing in Beatles records straight away, from Norwegian Wood, which he plays the sitar on. Of course, this is a very basic application of sitar. I mean, he uses it like he's playing a lead guitar line, like a little addition to the song. And that's how a lot of these sort of early pop songs, kind of raga rock songs, tended to use Indian instruments. But George quickly wants to go further. He wants to study Indian music seriously. He records this song "Love You Too," which is on Revolver, which is it shows how quickly he was progressing, because it's like a raga condensed into 3 minutes and then turned into a pop song. So you've got kind of Alap Georgiala phases in it. So it's very interesting to see how seriously he's engaging with it. And it's after that they meet. They don't meet until the summer of 1966. In London, they were introduced at a dinner party, and then they also hit it off. So first of all, there's this influence, the musical influence on George Harrison when he hears Indian music, and then he wants to meet Ravi Shankar, because Ravi Shankar is the foremost carrier of this music outside of India. And then they really hit it off. And then so they agree that George will come to India in the autumn of 1966. He comes to Bombay to learn music from Ravi Shankar. They tour around India for about 6 weeks together, ending up in Kashmir on a houseboat on Dal Lake. And George gets up every morning and does his sitar practice before breakfast and learning from Raviji. And when this news of this hits the kind of world airwaves, it goes ballistic. The idea of Indian music having this direct influence on Ravi Shankar, on George Harrison, and Ravi Shankar's career, which was already doing very well indeed. I mean, he's a big star in India, and he was highly respected elsewhere, but he suddenly becomes a kind of pop culture figure. And that's due to this connection. So that you get, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but he plays at Monterey Pop Festival the following summer in 1967. He plays at Woodstock a couple of years later. So he's really taken up to, he's elevated to the mainstream. And George Harrison is working through Indian music in Sgt. Pepper, and you see that influence throughout, right up to that point, as I said, where he kind of pulled back a bit in 1968. But their friendship continued. I mean, that was for his whole life. They were great friends and kind of musical allies.
Ravi Shankar hated Woodstock, by the way.
Yeah, he didn't like it. He loved Monterey Pop. He felt that the music, he had the kind of. He liked to play when there were people who were paying attention. He liked there to be a sort of reverence around Indian classical music. He'd got that from his guru, and that was something he maintained all his life. Woodstock, he said the music was like a sideshow. And, he came on at night, it was raining, there were 400,000 people in the mud. And, he said they were all stoned. But it just wasn't really the kind of gig he liked to play, really. And he sort of felt that was, he talked about it being about the sort of end of that phase, Woodstock. But it's still a good thing to have on your CV.
Yeah, of course. We get the feeling. Yeah. As a viewer. We'll be right back after this short break.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into A Show About Crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. You think Harrison was always thought of him as himself as a disciple to Ravi Shankar, or was it a friendship across cultures and more or less of equals?
It was an interesting relationship, and I think it had all these elements. I mean, it started out as a kind of Guru Shishya element because he was learning music from Ravi Shankar, but there was 23-year age gap when they met. Ravi Shankar was 46. George Harrison was 23, which was actually also the age I was when I met Ravi Shankar. But still, they did very quickly become friends, and I think I saw that interaction between them myself, that they would, they worked on different levels. Sometimes Ravi was like a father to him. Sometimes they were friends. Sometimes it was the other way around. George was, he could be very protective of Ravi G, especially as he was getting older and having health troubles. So it was really interesting, complex and very good friendship and relationship.
In Olivia Harrison's book, the connection shows up.
Yeah, definitely. It gives a substantial section of the book over to George's connection with Ravi, and some great photos that George took in India when they were together. Yeah, it's beautiful.
I think his son is also named by Ravi Ji, and he plays a mean guitar.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Ravi Ji named him. I don't think so, but he's called Dhani, but he spells it Dhani. So these are the Indian notes in the Sagam, Da and Ni. So that's well, it's exactly the kind of thing George would do, because he had a very playful manner and loved Indian music. But actually, they both shared that. They both shared that playfulness. That was definitely something that bonded them. This kind of punning humor and.
So, you're by way of being a Beatles expert, in a manner of speaking, and I'm sure you can give the genesis of most songs. You've done your Beatles bit. You've done Ravi Shankar. That's a monumental book, by the way. Our reviewer was totally sold to your book. Other reviews are quite good. What next for you from here? Both are exhausted, more or less. Or are they? The Beatles are fertile subjects.
I don't have any plan, actually. I haven't got another book lined up. People keep thinking there's nothing more to say about the Beatles. And then they keep being proved wrong. I don't know. I would say, it's very nice of you to say these nice things about me, but I'm probably more of a Ravi Shankar expert than a Beatles expert, because I had to immerse myself so much in him for that book. And you asked whether the subjects were exhausted. I think I was exhausted after doing it. I was about 5 or 6 years working on Indian Sun. A real labour of love, and what an amazing story. Really, he's such a remarkable figure, Ravi Shankar, and I hope Indians really do appreciate that, because such a great musician and such an extraordinary life that he had. It was, so interesting for me to go back over it. I'd worked with him before on his autobiography 20 years earlier, but I was still finding out so many things about him that I hadn't known about, or I think that maybe he had forgotten about. And including their kind of connection. I think I've got a new appreciation for his friendship with George and their influence on each other, which was great.
You've gone into his childhood quite a lot, and his early days.
Yes,
Almora and all that.
Yes, it's really fascinating. So he grew up in Varanasi up until the age of 10. Then at 10, they moved to Paris with his brother Uday's dance troupe, and then there's the period, pretty much at the time of the Second World War, actually, where he was learning in Maiha in MP from Alauddin Khan, and then also sometimes going up to Almora, where his brother Uday, had the amazing arts center, cultural center up there. And this is all kind of really well, I found it was very well documented, in terms of letters and reports and so on. Some amazing letters I found. I found these early letters that Ravi Shankar had written when he was 16 and his mother had just died, and very, very poignant, and he's debating his future already at 16. Should I be a dancer or a musician? And, that was a real dilemma for him, because he was already having a lot of success as a dancer, while also playing in the ensemble of the dance troupe. And then it's music that wins out. At age 18 is when he really commits to it. And it's quite dramatic, what he goes through at that time. I think it's, he really needed incredible strength, I think, really, because this was not the easy route. It would have been easier to be a dancer, I think. But I think to do that really hard, the hard miles, it's dramatic moment.
And this is in the 30s and 40s. Center too. And there is already a French dancer there, Madame Simki.
Yeah.
Uday Shankar goes to Paris. It's a remarkable period in history.
It is. And, this is all pre-independence as well. And then, there's all that kind of backstory to his life. I mean, I found that completely fascinating. I mean, this is Ravi Shankar, somebody who he lived through so much. He's born in 1920, so his early years were living under the British Raj, and then you got the whole wave of independence. And that's really when he starts becoming a national star around the time of independence, 1947, 48, 49. And it just, he lived till 2012. He lived through so much, and you find him popping up at all these key moments in Indian history, and such an extraordinary man.
Yeah, well, he's quite, his influence on common culture, popular culture, is also pretty strong in India. He composed for movies. He composed the signature tune for Doordarshan, for the Asian Games. It's quite strong when you think about it.
Yeah,
our presence in our lives.
It's true. And, it's good that you mentioned that. I think that a lot of people have forgotten that or don't know it. I was really struck as well. I mean, I mentioned that he became well known around the time of independence. He was then on All India Radio. He was the director of music in the 50s. And, he really, really did so much to put Indian classical music, into the homes of Indians all around the country. Because this, it's easy to forget this is a time when radio is new, actually. Radio starts to boom in India after independence because the British had neglected it. And then India, after independence, radio sets start to being sold all around the country much more. All India Radio is growing. And he's on the airwaves. He's the director of music. And what he does is he puts Indian music on the airwaves. And he's telling Indians, this is wonderful art. We should be proud of it. You should be listening to it. And the government supports it at that time. There's a lot of investment in musicians being on All India Radio. So he did a lot in India, and I think that's slightly forgotten. I know why. It's because his global fame was so big, and people always connect him with the Beatles, George Harrison, and the things we've been talking about. But I was really struck by that he did a lot in India before that, and there's a reason why he was the one who George Harrison encountered. It's because he was already so successful in India that he then took the music abroad. And plus he had the kind of personality for that. He had that kind of charisma, dynamism, and he was kind of on a mission, to kind of convince everyone that Indian classical music was the greatest. So he was there. That's why, when George Harrison wanted to hear some Indian music and he went to the record shop, he'd already got about 10 albums out at this point. And there was some other musicians were there as well, Ali Akbar Khan and the likes, but he was very much in the dominant position already at that time. But, had not been discovered by the pop world until 1965.
I think some other international pop stars, rock stars came to him. If I'm not mistaken, there's word that Jimmy Page came to him once.
Yeah, Jimmy Page says that he says that he thinks he was one of the earliest musicians in London to buy a sitar, and that he went to a Ravi Shankar concert and went backstage to talk to him. And but at this point, Page didn't actually know how to tune the sitar properly. So he says Ravi Shankar wrote it down on a piece of paper for him, how the strings should be tuned. So they had that initial encounter. I think that's probably 1963. Jimmy Page doesn't know exactly when that was, but I reckon that's my best guess. So yeah, there were other musicians who'd separately become interested in it. For example, David Crosby of the Byrds, Crosby, Stills and Nash. He actually was one who talked to George Harrison about it. I think he was an influence on George Harrison discovering Ravi Shankar. I also spoke to Robbie Krieger of The Doors, the Doors guitarist, and he had discovered Ravi Shankar's music from albums while he was still at high school in 1964-ish, around then. So independently, people were hearing it. And I guess it's because it was something that was new to them, and musically different. Musically, the structure of Indian music is different from Western music. The instruments are different, and the kind of overall feel of it. They often talked about this sort of sense of calm that they got from listening to Alap. John Coltrane was another, the great jazz saxophonist. He was another one who was inspired by
and
music.
He's incorporated it in something.
Yes. He started playing what they call modal jazz, and then he starts. He was definitely influenced by Indian music. He took some lessons from Ravi Shankar as early as 1961 in New York, and yes, you hear it in some of that music. There's a wonderful famous album of his called "A Love Supreme," and the influence is not explicit there, but I think that's a response to Indian music personally, or at least partly, and not least because he named his son Ravi Coltrane, who was born 9 months later. So you can think about that one.
So these are interesting things for listeners. But now, finally, after this wonderful chat of ours, the big question, and you have to throw some light on it. Who broke the Beatles? First, it was supposed to be Yoko Ono, but recently Paul McCartney said that it was John Lennon. Lennon and Harrison are no more. So who's to confirm?
Well, what Paul said about John splitting up the band, that's not actually new revelation. That was already known. That it was in September 1967, John said, I want to leave the band. So, but I think, there've been lots of different accounts. I mean, George had said in interviews that, it was coming anyway, basically. We were all going off in different directions. I don't give any credit to the Yoko Ono theory. I think they were just growing apart. Unfortunately, I think more and more what caused it in the short term was disputes about money. Alan Klein came in to run Apple, and it just seemed to cause a lot of tension. I think it all blew up in 1969, 70. I think that's one thing that's really interesting about Get Back is it shows that although there's a moment when George walks out of the band, but he comes back. And I think that you still see they're a very brilliant functioning band, and they could have gone on. They're talking very honestly about their future. Shall we stay together or not? But they could definitely have gone on. But I don't know. I don't know if there's like one smoking gun. I think they were just growing apart, and it's a shame for the rest of the world that they didn't stay together longer because they were still so brilliantly creative. But I think it was kind of fated. They were going to grow apart, and that's what happened.
It's one of those what if parts of history, but we are grateful to them because they were together for about 7 years, 8 years, starting in Hamburg and then the cellar, Hamburg, Liverpool. They meet as schoolboys. It's just amazing, the story. As I said, I feel they keep reinventing, and every album is a different album.
The evolution is so fast, isn't it? I mean, I think they were like sponges. They were kind of soaking up all these influences and just changing so quickly. I mean, it's astonishing that this all happened in about 6 or 7 years.
And so I have to say thank you very much for this great chat, because we, even in the short chat, have learned so much. I'm going to try and get hold of both the books because incidentally, you've seen the India pictures, haven't you, Paul Salzman?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that, there must be thousands of people who must be collectors of his work, of anything written by them, about them. I think John Lennon's poetry is available. So thank you very much for this wonderful chat. Now I'm going to have a look at the film and maybe be able to see it with that much more insight.
Thank you so much, Sidharth. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and thank you. I've enjoyed it a lot. Thanks for asking me.
That was Oliver Craske telling us about the Beatles, about Ravi Shankar, and explaining why they continue to rock and roll so many years later. We'll be back again next week with another guest. Till then, goodbye from all of us.
You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Wars and Warriors, Air Vice Marshal Arjun Subramanian takes listeners on a trip with the race to Dhaka and some of the most crucial moments from the lightning campaign of Bangladesh. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita drop some hot takes on NFTs, music, and the rise of social commerce. On Ikaduka Economy, Abhinav Trivedi and Dr. Bharat Junjunwala, author and ex-professor IIM Bangalore, discuss war and its effects on our daily lives. On Shunya One, we spoke to Alok Goyal. He's a partner at Stellaris Venture Partners. We discuss why SaaS works well for India. And on All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk discuss Australia's anti-trolling bill aimed at making social media platforms safer, but perhaps a little less private. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And also do check out our YouTube channels. We have a number of them. You can get them on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And remember, if you're enjoying this show, or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. It really does help us spread the word. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors for the network this week, Cred, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Do you like true crime stories? Do you like to learn about the people behind some horrible, awful crimes? More specifically, women that may have committed these crimes. Actually, Indian criminals that are women? Then we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Misconduct. My name is Raghavi. And I am Nisha. We cover themes like murder, dacoity, drug trafficking, financial fraud, kidnapping, and many more. You can catch us every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast.